A lot of African or Nigerian households, children are seen and not heard. Nigerian mentality is such a strong force. Hey guys, what's popping, what's cracking, hope you guys are well. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Welcome back to another video. If you're a regular viewer, subscriber. If you're new, hello, hi, join the family, hit that subscribe button. And also welcome to part 2 of my unpacking toxic and unhealthy mother-daughter relationships series. If you haven't watched part 1, you might want to pause this video, watch part 1 and then come back. But just to briefly summarize, part 1, I kind of just gave a introduction to the series, gave you guys a little bit of background about myself, my relationship with my teenage daughter, and also my relationship with my mother as well growing up, just to kind of give you guys a picture of where I'm coming from as we go forward into this series. So in today's episode, I really want us to really begin to talk about and look at some of the cultural, traditional and societal influences on toxic and unhealthy mother-daughter relationships, and really begin to get to the root of some of the issues that a lot of mother-daughter relationships seem to be suffering as a result of. As I was actually preparing to film this video, I did a little bit of research and I actually found a study from the Journal of Neuroscience, which I thought was quite interesting in regards to relationships between mothers and daughters. This research study basically highlights that mother-daughter relationships are actually the strongest of bonds out of any other parent-child relationship. The aim of the study actually was to discover why mood disorders such as depression are commonly passed on from mothers to daughters. And through the MRI scans of like 35 different families, they found that mothers and daughters actually have a similar anatomy when it comes to the part of the brain that controls emotions. And this association between mothers and daughters and the anatomy of the brain that regulates emotions was found to be significantly greater than father and son, or mother and son, or father and daughter. And so in conclusion, mothers and daughters are said to be more likely to understand each other's emotions and where they're coming from, and also are more likely to be able to relate to each other more than any other type of relationship, which I think to me makes sense. Woman to woman, it is quite easy for a woman to relate to another woman, especially on an emotional level, because as women, we are emotional beings. During the years of my daughter going through puberty, for example, I was able to really relate to her because as her mum, who's also a woman, I also went through that stage of life. I felt as her mum and also as a woman myself what she was going through, especially when it comes to things like body image and self-esteem and friends and all that kind of stuff, like just little things that you go through as a young woman growing into yourself. However, I find that because of that emotional relatability, there can also be a clash, despite scientifically being the ones with the strongest bond out of any parent-child relationship, especially on an emotional level. Why is it that there are so many mother-daughter relationships where the bond is literally non-existent, very toxic and very unhealthy, and there's actually a lack of emotional relatability and either a non-existent emotional connection or a complete breakdown of an emotional connection? In a US study of over 1,000 mothers, almost 52% of mothers were actually estranged from their daughter. And a recent UK study from December 2021 also found that 1 in 10 people have had a falling out with a parent that is beyond the adult child's desire to even have a relationship with that parent, which is quite sad. And of course, there are a plethora of reasons as to why parents and children have breakdown in their relationships and they no longer talk to each other, they're distant or estranged. There's literally so many reasons as to why these things happen. But considering the fact that mother-daughter relationships are said to have the strongest bond out of any other parent-child relationship, and knowing that there are so many women who do desire to have a close relationship with either their mother or with their child that they have now or the child that they're going to have in future, I think it's really important that we look at some of the reasons why these breakdowns happen so that we can either try to mend these breakdowns where possible or try to avoid these breakdowns as much as we can. So what are the cultural and traditional influences on toxic and unhealthy mother-daughter relationships? As I said in part 1, I am of Nigerian descent. My mum is Nigerian. Coming from a Nigerian background, growing up in a Nigerian household, I would say there are definitely some things that can aid to toxic mother-daughter relationships within the Nigerian or African culture. The parent-child dynamics in a lot of African households can be quite problematic, if I'm allowed to say that. All right, I know that for every culture there's probably something within that cultural household that you guys can probably say, yeah, I know that definitely in my culture, in our household, certain things you have experienced or seen or know about are also problematic. But obviously, as someone who is Nigerian and from a Nigerian background and from a Nigerian culture, it's easier for me to kind of speak from that perspective. And I know that there may be other Nigerians or Africans and even Asians who might be able to relate to some of the things that I'm going to go into in regards to the cultural and traditional aspects of parent-child relationships and how that in turn can be a catalyst in the breakdown of specifically mother-daughter relationships. I think it's safe to say that within a Nigerian household, the parent-child dynamics is very much based on respect and dictatorship. A lot of African parents are dictators in their household and they kind of demand respect from their children. There's this overarching, unspoken understanding that you don't cause shame or embarrassment to your family, to your household, to your parents. You have to listen to your parents, you have to obey your parents, you have to do what your parents tell you to. And there's a very high expectation of you as a child to be what your parents want you to be and to do what your parents want you to do. Whether or not you as a child have a right to respect or not, that's not really considered. The main thing is that you respect your parents. Your parents know best and they are always right. Your parents are your provider, they raise you, and then when you get older, you look after them. A lot of the childhood upbringing is so that not only that you can look after yourself, but also that you can look after your parents. And I think within every culture and every tradition, there are good aspects of it, and then there are also quite bad or problematic aspects of it. And there are also extremes. A lot of African or Nigerian households, children are seen and not heard. And even when you are at an age where, you know, essentially you should have the right to speak, you should have the right to voice your opinions, you should be able to express yourself, even then it's kind of like, no. And with a dynamic like that in a household, it can make growing up very difficult. I mean, growing up is already a difficult journey as a child. All the different stages, all the different phases, all the different feelings, emotions, experiences. It's very likely that there's gonna be some clashes in those growing pains. The environment that a lot of Nigerian or African households set for their children, it can have a real negative effect on the growing pains that already exist as a child growing up. There can be a lot of clashes, and I find that a lot of the clashes can sometimes occur when the child is now at an age where they feel like, oh, I should be able to speak up, I should be able to say something and stick up for myself and share and express myself. But because of the dynamic that's already existed between parent and child or mother and daughter, parent doesn't want to listen and child is frustrated that parent isn't listening. And there are times where a lot of parents actually grow to become less combative, less dictatorish. And when it comes to mother-daughter relationships, from that dynamic, there can be a lot of expectation from the mother to the daughter, and a lot of times those expectations come from a generational, cultural, traditional mindset from the mother that has been passed on from generation to generation, and this is just what is expected of you as the child, as the daughter. And this can result in resentment. A lot of women resent their mothers. A lot of mothers resent their daughters. Now, just to touch on the emotional aspect of things, it's quite alarming that a lot of African or Nigerian households lack an emotional connection. A lot of Nigerian parents don't actually have an emotional connection with their children. Deep, meaningful emotional connection. And this is also a generational thing. You often find that as a Nigerian, your parents didn't have an emotional connection with their parents, and their parents didn't have an emotional connection with their parents, and it's just ongoing as a generational thing where there's just this lack of deep emotional connection between parent and child. Just imagine how that affects a young girl growing up and not having that deep emotional connection with the parent who she's supposed to relate to the most emotionally. And that bond that's supposed to automatically be there and bring them together is just not there. And where there should be some level of understanding between a mother and a daughter, because we're both girls, we were both young women growing up, and we're both women now if you're already grown, that understanding, that connection is not there. A lot of Nigerian mums, or just Nigerian parents in general, there's this thing about age that they really like hold on to, and they literally like weaponize their age in order to further dictate and control and demand respect from their children, in a sense that I'm older than you, I know better, you can't express yourself, you can't talk to me, you can't share things with me because I'm older. There's this intentional barrier that is placed between the parent and the child because the parent is older, and therefore it's almost as if the child doesn't have a right to speak or right to have a thought process or a right to express themselves based on the fact that they are a child and you are the parent. And there's also this thing of parents growing up in a certain time that is different to us. So for example, my mum grew up in a certain time, I grew up in a certain time, and now my daughter is growing up in a certain time. But when that is also used to create further barriers between mother and child, that can also breed room for a lack of understanding, a lack of relatability, a lack of emotional connection, and just creating distance in general between parent and child, between mother and daughter. There's a lack of good communication because, again, the child is not allowed to express themselves, the child is not allowed to have an opinion, the child is not allowed to be right because the parent is always right. There's no way the parent can be wrong. Physical violence is used as a solution to almost every difficult situation or challenging situation, can also be the breeding ground for toxic and unhealthy dynamics between mothers and daughters, parent and child in general. I find that there can be a lack of humility on the parents' part because, again, they deem themselves to be the ones that are always right. You have to listen to me, I don't need to listen to you, I'm the parent. I found that there are a lot of parenting mistakes, or just the traditional and cultural way of parenting within Nigerian households or African households, that are essentially the cause or the root of a lot of trauma within their children, and that in itself can cause resentment and friction between parent and child. I think that mother-daughter relationships tend to feel the worst brunt of that. The impact that has can be the most damaging out of any other parent-child relationship. I think we can all agree that we need our mums. Daughters need their mums. Sons need their mums. The role of a mum in a household and the position of a mum in a household. Not to take anything away from fathers, because I think that fathers are very, very, very important in a household, or at least a father figure to a child. Even if a father can't be in a household, having someone who is a father figure to a child, I think is very, very important. However, the position of a mother to a child is extremely important. We cannot deny the heavy importance of a mother in a child's life, and even more so the importance of a mother in a daughter's life. So I previously mentioned in part 1, I kind of gave you guys a brief background in regards to the relationship that I had with my mum growing up, and some of the challenges and the things that we kind of butt heads about when I was younger. Certain experiences that my mum went through affected me as her daughter. There was a very particular thing that happened to me, I think when I was in my early 20s, that really shook me and my mum's relationship, and it had the potential to cause real damaging friction between me and my mum, to the point where we could have literally just been super distant. But thankfully that wasn't the case, and I think that was very much down to me understanding the things that I needed to work on within myself as her daughter, and also her understanding what she needed to work on within herself as my mum. Despite the cultural and traditional Nigerian mindset that, like many other Nigerian parents, are very much ingrained in, as much as the situation affected me and it was very much about my life and my background and my identity, it was also very much about my mum and her life experiences and things that she had gone through. And it was something that was very much her story, as well as it being my story as well. And in me understanding that it is very much something that affects her, I'm very careful to not just see it as, well, it affects me too, I didn't ask to be here, this situation is because of you and your choices and things that you've done. I think for me, I felt like I wanted to talk about it. I wanted answers. I wanted an explanation. And I was going through the motions of feeling lost, feeling confused, feeling all these emotions, and not really having a way of expressing those emotions to my mum in a way that she could understand. And from her perspective, and with her cultural, traditional mindset as a Nigerian woman and a parent, there was certain things that she thought to herself that I don't need to give you an explanation. It is what it is, and I don't owe you an explanation in that sense. I found that in that situation, my mum very much didn't really know how to be towards me. She didn't know how to communicate her feelings. She didn't know how to communicate her emotions. And I know that she was very much going through it herself. There was a lot of things that she was dealing with in regards to that situation. And rather than having that, you know, emotional bond and relatability, we kind of clashed instead. And a lot of our emotions, a lot of our feelings, a lot of the things that we were trying to process actually turned into anger, which then developed into resentment, to the point where we couldn't discuss the issue, or we couldn't talk about the issue without there being a huge argument that would result in me stepping out of the boundaries of respecting my mom, and her feeling disrespected and lashing out at me as well, when I would feel that I don't deserve to be getting lashed out at. Meanwhile, she's just as confused and just as frustrated and just as, you know, emotionally broken down, and just trying to wrap her head around the situation herself. And I certainly didn't want to resent my mum, because I knew that in some ways what happened wasn't her fault. Yes, she made some choices that impacted my life, but at the same time I can understand she made those choices when she didn't know better. She was living out her life, making her own mistakes. I definitely had to pray about that situation between me and my mom. I had to pray about our relationship because I definitely didn't want us to have that kind of dynamic, and I didn't want us to have that kind of relationship where we were just constantly arguing. It definitely took me humbling myself. It took me trying to really understand things from my mom's perspective. I can put myself in your shoes and see things from your perspective, and because I was able to do that, I was able to approach the situation with a different energy. And I would say that a lot of me coming to that point was down to my relationship with God, and down to me just praying and seeking God for guidance and direction, and understanding the situation from a perspective of knowing that regardless of whatever the situation, the circumstances is, God is in control. God has a plan and a purpose for my life, and I'm here for a reason. So that personally within myself helped me to then be able to approach my mom in a whole different way. And I think for her, she was able to appreciate that, and that helped her to be able to also let down those walls and those cultural and traditional things that were causing a blockage and causing a barrier in us being able to talk about the situation without fighting and arguing with each other, which I definitely have so much respect for my mum for, because I understand how difficult that would have been for her to be able to say, you know what, I want to understand my daughter and somehow be able to get through this without damaging our relationship. And that's one thing I definitely thank God for in regards to my mum, is that regardless of the difficulties or challenges that she has had with any one of her children, as her daughter, there's always been a sense of me knowing that my mum wants to have a good relationship with me. She wants to have a good relationship with all of her children. And as I've gotten older, I've been able to definitely see things from her perspective, and she in turn has been able to see things and understand things from my perspective as well, which not a lot of Nigerian mums can do. A lot of Nigerian parents and Nigerian mums are just not able to get to that point, which is really, really sad. And I understand that there are a lot of young women who really want to have a good and close relationship with their mum, but they feel that their efforts are not being appreciated. And I know that there's certain things that a lot of Nigerian parents are literally just stuck in their ways about, and there's just no changing of those things. Nigerian mentality is such a strong force amongst Nigerians. Honestly guys, I just feel like it takes a lot of prayer, a lot of patience, a lot of having to put certain things in place in order to navigate dealing with Nigerian parents in a way that doesn't completely destroy your relationship, especially as you get older. The positive input of both mother and child is definitely really important in the process of creating, developing and sustaining a healthy relationship between mother and daughter, regardless of cultural, traditional or societal influences on their relationship and their relationship dynamic. And I think that a lot of Nigerian and African parents need to understand this and need to take this on board if they want to be able to have and sustain healthy relationships with their children, and more specifically the relationship between Nigerian or African mothers with their daughters. Now, being a Nigerian mother myself, I did grow up in a strong Nigerian household, so whether I like it or not, there are definitely some cultures and traditions that have essentially been passed down to me, have become a part of me, and have also come to light in me becoming a mum to my daughter. Over the years, there's definitely been some things that I subconsciously didn't know or wasn't aware that I had internalized and allowed to be part of my parenting style or parenting approach with my daughter, that I have definitely had to unlearn. So in part 3, I'm going to be going into more detail about some of the things that I've had to learn and unlearn as as a mother to my daughter. So make sure you guys tune in for part 3, because I'm definitely going to be dragging myself and taking accountability, which I think is very, very important. There needs to be a lot of accountability. There needs to be a lot of honesty for us to be able to move forward and promote positive, healthy mother-daughter relationships. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please do feel free to leave a comment down below. I'd love to read your thoughts on some of the things I've discussed in today's video. Make sure you hit the like button. It would really help to push this video for others to be able to see it, others who can benefit from it. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications. All right guys, thank you again for watching this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye guys.